I'm Avon Morel, and the night it happened, my own father looked me in the eyes and chose someone else. Not gently, not silently. He watched while the woman he married told me I was no longer part of this family. Then he nodded, as if my existence had always been optional. I didn't argue, I didn't beg. I just stood there, realizing the worst heartbreak isn't when a stranger betrays you. It's when the person who raised you quietly decides you're disposable. And when I finally walked away from that house, I thought the pain of being cast out was the end of the story. I had no idea it was only the opening move, and that someone in my own bloodline had already started planning what would happen to me next. I walked into the birthday gathering, expecting nothing more dramatic than forced smiles and a predictable toast. The rented farm outside Tacoma looked peaceful enough from the driveway, string lights swaying in the wind. The long wooden tables dressed like a smaller Thanksgiving spread. But the moment I stepped into the backyard, the warmth in the air thinned, conversations softened, a few cousins exchanged glances that felt almost rehearsed, as if my presence shifted the balance of the room. Clarissa stood near the center, wine glass lifted just high enough for attention. Her smile was polite in a way that made my stomach twist. It never reached her eyes. When she started talking, her tone didn't match the celebration around us. She called out the fact that I was still living in the house, tossed the words like crumbs to feed the waiting stares, and the crowd reacted exactly how she wanted. Faces turning, whispers rising, a flicker of pity mixed with judgment sweeping through people who'd known me since childhood. I looked to my father, waiting for him to steady the moment the way he always used to. But he didn't meet my eyes. He mumbled something quiet, so quiet it barely rose above the clinking of silverware, and told me I should leave. No justification, no hesitation, just the finality of someone choosing the easier side of a dividing line. Rain began to fall as I walked back toward the front porch. My suitcase was already sitting on the step, closed neatly, like someone had packed it long before the party began. I didn't bother wiping the water from my face. I just picked up the handle and stepped out into the dark Washington night. When I glanced back, Mason was closing the door without a word. No anger, no confusion, just a flat, practiced dismissal, as if erasing me from the picture was an errand he'd been meaning to check off. And as I reached the dirt road, I noticed a black Ford Expedition parked just far enough away to blend into the shadows. Engine silent, lights off. Something about the way it waited there made the night feel colder than the rain ever could. Rain kept falling long after I left the farm, turning the sidewalks into thin silver mirrors that reflected streetlights and my own uncertainty. I wandered through Tacoma with no destination, pulling my jacket tighter each time the wind sliced through it. Gas stations along Highway 16 spilled yellow light across the pavement, but every time I drifted near one, a strange instinct pulled me back. I didn't know where I belonged anymore, but I knew where I shouldn't stay. I eventually stopped beneath the awning of a closed cafe, grateful for even the smallest patch of dryness. That was when a rough, firm voice rose from the shadows beside the door. "Come here, girl." I turned and saw a woman sitting against the wall, wrapped in layers of worn coats. Her gray hair fell in loose strands, her hands trembling slightly from the cold. But there was nothing frail about her eyes. They tracked me with the kind of precision that made me feel exposed. When I stepped closer, she leaned forward and gripped my wrist strong. Steady, almost urgent. "Don't sleep where they expect you to. Not the house, not the park, not that church you used to stop at. Someone's been watching you." Her words hit me harder than the cold rain ever could. This was a stranger, someone who shouldn't know anything about me. I asked her who she was talking about, but she only shook her head, as if naming him would pull him closer. She told me there had been a man circling my street for weeks, a black Ford Expedition, same driver every time, pretending to be on his phone while never taking his eyes off my door. Then she described the mark on his wrist, a stylized lock, etched into the skin. I knew that symbol. Only people tied to the Morel family ever wore it. In that moment, everything inside me shifted. Getting thrown out had felt cruel. But random. This wasn't random. This was preparation. I didn't know why she cared enough to warn me, but something in her voice sliced through my confusion. I listened, I took the last $83 I had and rented a cheap motel room by the waterfront. The sheets were old and the heater rattled all night, but when I locked the door behind me, for the first time since the party, I felt like I might make it through the night alive. Later, lying awake in the dim glow of a flickering lamp, it hit me fully. If I had slept anywhere familiar that night, I wouldn't have survived what was coming. Morning came with a gray sky and the heaviness of unanswered questions. I went back to find the woman from the night before Maribel. She sat on the same bench near the cafe, staring down the road with a stillness that felt deliberate, almost protective. When I approached, she slipped a folded piece of paper into my hand. They misunderstood what carries your name. I asked her what that meant, but she only looked past me, as if the answer lived in memories too painful to touch. A knot formed in my stomach. Something was wrong beyond what I'd already seen. I needed clarity. So I headed to City Hall. The clerk handed me the property file with a stiffness that told me he recognized the name. Inside the folder, dread pooled in my throat. Clarissa had filed paperwork to take full ownership of the house, but the timestamp made my chest tighten. 24 hours before the birthday party. Not only that, a bold clause appeared on the next page. Transfer upon incapacitation. If I were ever deemed unable to handle my affairs, she would assume control. Heat surged through my chest, anger. Betrayal. Disbelief all tangled together. They didn't just want distance from me. They wanted to erase my claim entirely. Then I saw his name, Mason, listed as the person who assisted in preparing the documents. When I walked out of City Hall, the same black expedition rolled slowly along the curb, its windows dark enough to hide whoever sat behind them. My pulse quickened. Someone was making sure I stayed exactly where they wanted me, alone, unprotected, and afraid. That night, a message pinged onto my phone. No name, no greeting, just a threat wrapped in calmness. Stop digging. Leave Tacoma now. I checked the number. It belonged to the law firm Clarissa used for every estate document tied to my family. That was when everything snapped into focus. I wasn't just being pushed out. I was being targeted. When I stepped out of City Hall, the black expedition was still there, parked just far enough away to pretend it had nothing to do with me. I acted like I didn't notice it and sat at the bus stop, my fingers shaking as I unfolded the photocopies I had grabbed on my way out. My eyes went straight to the signature in the corner of the property file. My father's handwriting had always been clean, deliberate, steady. Yet here it slanted and trembled like the hand of someone sedated or half-conscious. I'd seen him sign his name my whole life. He never wrote like this. I turned to the supporting documents and froze. Clarissa had filed a medical assessment on his behalf, part of it blacked out. But 3 words had escaped the marker: cognitive decline, suspected. The meaning hit hard. They were building a case that he was no longer capable of managing his own affairs. My throat tightened as betrayal settled into my chest, like weight strapped to my ribs. My phone buzzed. A missed call from an unfamiliar number. No voicemail. A quick search showed it belonged to the internal line of Clarissa's law firm. Before I could process that, another message appeared. We know what you did at City Hall. Do not return. A chill went through me. Instead of going back toward work, I drove to Ruston Way to clear my head. But as soon as I slowed at the waterfront, headlights exploded behind me. The expedition surged forward, crossing the line and ramming me toward the cliff edge where the waves crashed violently below. I yanked the wheel, skidding into a parking space and barely avoiding a light pole. The SUV disappeared into the rain-soaked dark. Breathing hard, I stepped out to inspect the damage. A scrape ran across my door, perfectly aligned with the height of a large SUV. But the real punch came when I spotted a torn silver decal stuck beneath my mirror. I peeled it off and held it under the streetlight. Only a fragment of the name remained. Harbor Security. Gig Harbor. Where Clarissa had a stake in a private rehabilitation facility, the realization landed with force. This wasn't just about removing me. My father might be trapped in that place right now, back at the motel. The hallway felt hostile, the flickering neon lights buzzing as if warning me I no longer had anywhere to hide. I slid my key into the lock, but my phone vibrated again. Do not return to the hospital. We know your shifts. The number didn't exist when I tried to call it back. I wasn't just being watched now, I was being cataloged, tracked, predicted. I grabbed my coat and ran through the rain to find Maribel. She was under the cafe awning, her bag clutched tightly, her expression grim. The moment she saw me, she murmured that I had barely escaped what was meant for me. Then she reached into her coat and pulled out something wrapped in a scrap of fabric, a USB drive. She said she had planted a tiny camera near the bench I usually passed after work because she had seen the expedition shadowing me night after night. The way the driver studied me had reminded her of people preparing to remove a problem permanently. Back in my room, I shoved a chair against the door and opened my laptop. The video flickered to life in eerie blue night vision. There stood Mason beside a man in a black security jacket. Their voices were low but unmistakable. If she leaves Tacoma before signing anything, the rest is ours, and if she doesn't, then we make sure she can't interfere. My stomach dropped. There was no hesitation in Mason's voice, no doubt. No guilt. The camera then caught the expedition's plate, partially obscured but enough to search. It belonged to Harbor Security LLC, operating out of Gig Harbor. Then came the final clip. A man with silver hair was being escorted into another vehicle. Even in the grainy dark, I recognized him instantly. My father. A voice off camera murmured, "Keep the dosage steady." Everything inside me clenched. He wasn't recovering. He wasn't resting. He was being controlled. I stood up with one thought cutting through the fear. I had to get to Gig Harbor. And I had to go tonight. I left Tacoma close to midnight, driving into the fog that clung to Gig Harbor like a warning. The road cut through wet forest, and every pair of headlights made my pulse spike. Afraid the expedition had found me again, the rehabilitation center Clarissa invested in sat buried behind the harbor, polished and silent, too perfect a place to hide someone no one was meant to see. I parked behind the staff wing, slipped on old scrubs, and entered through the side door. No one checked my badge. In a place this controlled, that wasn't oversight, that was confidence no outsider would ever walk in, the hallway smelled of antiseptic. I passed the medication board and froze at my father's name. His night dose was far heavier than anything appropriate. A note beside it read, "Keep patient calm, no external contact." My stomach knotted. I found his room and eased the door open. He lay there half awake, eyes sluggish, movements dulled, not confusion, but chemical fog. When he finally focused on me, he whispered that Clarissa said I had walked away from him. The lie stung so sharply I felt it in my teeth. I told him the truth, and he trembled, insisting he never meant for this to happen. Before I could say more, sharp footsteps echoed. The door flew open. Clarissa stood framed in yellow light, her face composed in a way that chilled me. Mason hovered behind her, arms crossed, gaze empty. I confronted them, and Clarissa dismissed me with icy calm, reminding me how the law granted a spouse authority once someone was deemed unfit. Mason dropped a folder onto the table, Declaration of Incapacity. I activated the recorder in my watch and asked what they planned to do with me once he signed. Clarissa smiled faintly. She said they only needed me to stay silent. The door shut behind them, and I knew if I didn't fight back now, I'd be next. Their footsteps faded, and I slipped into the staff hallway. The motion sensors flicked on like alarms with every step. Back in the medication room, I searched frantically and found an envelope hidden beneath the drawer, the original incapacity declaration, payment transfers between Clarissa and Harbor Security, and a schedule of increasing sedation for my father. Before I could breathe, a radio crackled down the hall. "Check corridor 3. Someone's in the med room." I bolted. Rain slapped my face as I burst into the yard. I hid behind a waste container while footsteps closed in. A man's voice said they were ordered to keep me contained until morning. Panic surged. I crawled under the fence, only to be hit by a blinding beam, the expedition tearing down the harbor road. I ran into the woods, branches whipping my face. The SUV's lights carved through the trees as I dove into a rocky crevice. The engine stopped. Someone stood close enough to hear my breath, muttering they'd handle me before calling Mason. A sudden gust snapped a branch onto the trail, sending them stumbling back. I seized the chance, sprinting down the muddy slope toward the pier. A lone taxi sat by the dock. I pounded on the window, begging for help. The driver opened the door without a question. As we pulled away, I looked back. The expedition sat dark at the forest's edge. A figure lifted a radio. "Mason!" "She's gone." Moved to Plan B. A cold certainty settled in me. If I didn't act fast, I wouldn't live to see morning. I sat in the back of the taxi, soaked to the skin, shaking from cold and fear. The driver watched me through the mirror, with a weary kind of sympathy, saying I'd gotten myself into something big. I didn't answer. I just held the evidence envelope tight against my chest, as if the pressure alone could keep me upright. When we reached Tacoma, I asked to stop at the Pierce County Sheriff's Office. Officers glanced up as though I'd stumbled out of a disaster. I handed over everything: the USB, the recording from my watch, the forged transfer documents, the payment trail linking Clarissa to Harbor Security. A detective reviewed the footage and immediately called in Major Crimes. The moment they heard Clarissa declare I no longer existed in the family, the room fell silent. Another investigator pulled me aside, explaining my father had been flagged as a vulnerable adult, meaning this wasn't just fraud but felony-level abuse. Then my phone vibrated. "The police won't make it in time. We'll handle this faster." A heavy thud rattled the front windows. Outside, the black expedition sat waiting, Mason's silhouette visible behind the glass. Officers moved me to a secure room as radio intercepts came in. "Move patient B, M, immediately." My father. Tonight would decide everything. An officer let me ride in the second cruiser heading to Gig Harbor. Rain hammered the roof as we sped through the dark, the tires slicing through deep puddles with a sound like waves breaking against rock. The first patrol car reached the facility gate seconds ahead of us, its flashing lights casting violent color across the trees. The security gate was locked. Harbor security guards stepped out, ready to demand a warrant until the tactical team advanced. Their voices were firm, unshakable. They had emergency evidence of elder abuse, medical fraud, and unlawful detainment. Open the gate or they would force entry. The lock clicked. We surged inside. My father lay in his room, an IV dripping into his arm, eyes half open but unfocused. A nurse jumped as officers shouted for her to step away. When he saw me, something sparked behind the haze. I grabbed his hand. Tears mixing with the rain soaked into my sleeves. In admin, officers uncovered more documents. Clarissa had planned to transfer everything to Mason within a week. A nurse confessed they'd been ordered to double his sedative that night to prevent him from waking enough to refuse signatures. Then Clarissa appeared, calm, coat dark with rain, phone still in hand. She accused us of destroying a perfect plan. Officers told her to drop the phone. She didn't. They cuffed her for elder abuse, falsifying medical records, witness intimidation, and intentional harm. As they led her away, Mason burst down the hall screaming she'd done it all for the family, and in his panic, he shouted that my father should have signed already and I wasn't supposed to come back tonight. His confession was caught on every body cam. Clarissa snapped at him to shut up. But it was already over. My family had destroyed itself in front of me. 2 months later, I stood inside a Pierce County courtroom with Maribel's USB pressed between my palms, its plastic edges warm from how long I'd been holding it. It felt surreal watching the prosecutor unravel everything piece by piece. Mason in the night vision footage discussing what to do with me, Clarissa's cold voice in the recording, the forged transfer documents, the payments to Harbor Security, and the statements from the nurses who finally admitted the orders they'd been given. Each new exhibit stripped away another layer of the life I thought I had, until the truth stood there bare and undeniable. Clarissa was convicted on multiple charges: elder abuse, medical fraud, unlawful detainment, intentional harm. Mason was placed under court supervision and faced additional charges for intimidation and participation in the plan. My father was moved to a state-run care center where the fog of sedation began to lift. During my visits, he remembered small fragments: a conversation, a photograph, the fact that he never meant to abandon me. Those moments became small anchors of hope. I left Tacoma behind and moved to Olympia, buying a tiny home near the shoreline. The air tasted different there: pine, salt, a hint of freedom I hadn't realized I'd forgotten. Quiet no longer felt threatening. It felt earned. When Maribel transitioned into supportive housing, I visited her. She took my hand, reminding me she hadn't saved me, she'd simply helped me see the darkness for what it was. I laughed through tears, telling her she kept me from being erased entirely. She smiled, saying real family tells the truth even when it hurts. That stayed with me as I walked toward the ocean at sunset. The sky washed in copper light, for the first time in years. My steps weren't running away from anything. They were carrying me forward toward a life that finally felt like my own.